Hi, I'm Calen. My family told the world I was unstable, that I walked away from the Carter legacy out of pride. But what if I told you they forged wills, silenced my mother, and funneled our inheritance into offshore accounts while smiling through Sunday brunch? They didn't just betray me, they erased me. And now, I've got one letter, one voice, and one shot to set everything right. Would you open it, if it meant reopening every wound? I was folding laundry in my small living room in Louisville when my phone lit up at exactly 6:37 p.m. The chill in the late autumn air seeped in through the cracked window as I hit play. My father's voice, flat and distant, cut through the silence. "You're out of the family business, Calen. Don't call back." I listened again, then a third time, heart pounding so hard it felt like glass shattering in my chest. I sank onto the couch as the fireplace TV glowed silently behind me. My thumbs hovered before I texted a single word. Understood. I sat frozen, the words echoing. Breathing felt optional. 11 years of my life, early mornings unloading shipments, late nights balancing ledgers, counseling worried store owners, wiped away with one voicemail. I had postponed my own ambitions, shelved my software startup forever, all for our family chain of hardware stores. Seeing it erased, it was like watching my identity vanish. Morning came dim and quiet. I brewed coffee slow, the machine's hiss barely masking everything I didn't want to feel. Then I scrolled through social media. There it was, our company's post. My brother Dorian, beaming at the grand opening of the new store in Evansville under his name alone. The caption boasted, "Proud to have Dorian lead our family into a bright future." No mention of me. A whole paragraph thanking longtime staffers. Except one. Me. My phone buzzed, a client I'd mentored for 5 years, writing, "I heard the news. I hope you're doing okay, Calen. Let me know if I can help." His sympathy felt kind, but hollow. That morning I realized something cold and certain. They had erased me. Not just from the company, but from their narrative. 3 days earlier, I'd voiced concerns in the boardroom against taking out a questionable loan tied to a condo development in a low-income neighborhood. They wanted rapid expansion under Dorian's vision. I challenged the risk. In front of Mom, Dad, and half a dozen senior managers, he dismissed me with a wave. Mom chimed in. "Let your brother lead. It's time." I swallowed my pride and stepped back. They rewarded me with exile. Now I walk through my house, bare ceilings, thrift store furniture, reminders that my life changed in 4 seconds of voicemail. I open my laptop and sift through the folder labeled Family, the unheard, unspoken evidence of my work. Spreadsheets, expense reports, even contracts I'd finalized in my name. I delete nothing. That voice message, too, I move it into a hidden folder labeled Archive. I'll need it. I stare out the window. The chill biting my skin is a signal. Winter is coming. The kind that settles beneath your bones when everything familiar disappears. My reflection in the glass looks tired, but not broken. There's a small spark. I still have my mind, my skills, my drive. Alone, yes, but I'm far from defeated. I type one more line in a text. "Thanks for reaching out." Then I delete it. Let them interpret silence however they will. Tomorrow starts a new chapter. And they've only just begun the story. The morning after the voicemail, I sat on the porch with a chipped mug of black coffee. The kind of morning where even the birds sounded unsure of their place. I didn't check my phone right away. I just stared across the lawn, the dew still clinging to the grass like the last traces of a life I used to have. Eventually, the screen lit up. A single text from Mom. "I hope you understand it's for the best. No punctuation, no warmth, no call." I read it twice. Then again. Each time, the same. Chill. My thumb hovered over the keyboard, itching to ask. Understand what? But I knew better. That message wasn't just about business. It was about blood, about loyalty, about who was in and who had been silently voted out. I locked the screen and placed the phone face down on the table. The porch creaked beneath me as I leaned back, staring at the clouds rolling past. They moved with a kind of certainty I hadn't felt in days. Back inside, I opened my laptop, mostly out of habit. My inbox was cleaner than usual. Too clean. The company's shared calendar, gone. Group chats, empty. Even the Slack channel where we used to joke about supply delays and difficult vendors disappeared. It was like someone had taken an eraser to my digital footprint. I paused at an old folder labeled Leadership Retreats. I clicked through photos. There I was, 2 years ago, standing beside Dad, holding up a model for our expansion plan. That photo used to make me proud. Now it made me feel foolish. Facebook was worse. My feed was flooded with pictures from a party at Dad's lake house last night. Everyone smiling. Dorian in a blazer, standing beside a cake that read, "To New Beginnings." Even my cousins, who lived 3 counties away, were there. I hadn't even gotten a text. The caption on one photo read, "Family first." I stared at it like it was a foreign language. It hit me then. I had driven past the lake house that night. I remembered slowing down, seeing cars lined along the gravel drive, hearing faint laughter over the water. I thought maybe Dad had friends over. I kept driving. Something in me already knew. Later that afternoon, my cousin Jared texted, "Sorry you couldn't make it. Dorian's speech was something else." No smiley face, no explanation. I stared at the message until the screen dimmed. That evening I went to the grocery store. I needed bread and some illusion of normalcy. In the frozen foods aisle, I passed Mrs. Pennington, a customer I'd helped countless times with delivery issues and home repairs. She looked up, started to smile, then caught herself and nodded awkwardly before walking away. Even silence was being used as a weapon now. Back home, I poured a drink. Sat in my car for a while, not going anywhere. Just sitting. The sun was dipping low when I pulled into the office parking lot out of instinct. The building looked different. Glass walls that once symbolized openness now just reflected back a man who no longer belonged. I tried the keycard. Nothing. Just a red light. I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel and laughed quietly. It wasn't funny, but sometimes your body doesn't know the difference. I looked at the row of windows on the second floor. My office had been the third one from the left. I used to open those blinds every morning, let the sun in. Today, the blinds were drawn. "You erased me before I even left," I whispered. I didn't expect an answer, but I got one. Just not in words. Back at home, while sorting through a drawer of old receipts and ledgers in Dad's study, I found something. A folded piece of paper tucked behind an old maintenance log. My name. Crossed out. A week passed since the voicemail, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper had been set in motion. Not just an exile, but a setup years in the making. So I drove out to the family estate in Shelbyville. The house had been mostly locked up since Dad passed, but I still had a key. That, at least, hadn't been taken from me. Not yet. The sun was low when I arrived, casting long shadows across the front porch. Dust clung to every surface like a skin. The study door creaked as I pushed it open. The air inside was heavy, thick with the scent of old leather and the faintest trace of his cologne, clinging to the curtains. I told myself I was just here for some notebooks I'd left behind. But truthfully, I needed answers, and this was the only place that hadn't erased me yet. Dad's ledgers were still on the shelves, lined in perfect order, each one labeled in his tidy script. I pulled one down at random, running my fingers over the brittle paper, scanning the rows of numbers. I didn't know what I was looking for, only that I hadn't stopped looking since the call. Then I saw it. Tucked between the pages of one volume was a folded piece of stationery, the edges yellowed, corners curling inward. A coffee stain bled through one side. On the front, in faint but unmistakable handwriting, it read, "To the son who keeps asking the right questions." I knew that handwriting. Aunt Grace, my father's sister. She'd been CFO once, before she disappeared from our lives like a ghost no one was allowed to mention. I hadn't seen her since I was 10. She was the kind of story whispered at family reunions, then cut off when the kids walked in. Hands trembling, I unfolded the letter. It wasn't long. "Calen, if you found this, it means you're close. There's a pattern they never thought you'd notice, because they never expected you to look beneath the numbers. Dorian didn't build his empire alone, and your father didn't just look the other way. When you start to disappear in their eyes, it means you've seen too much. Grace." I read it again. Slower. Each sentence cracked something open. The ledgers in my lap suddenly weighed 100 pounds. I flipped through them, page after page, and now it all clicked. The same vendor names, the off-book transactions, the inflated real estate values shuffled across holding companies. It wasn't sloppy. It was elegant, purposeful. Dorian had been skimming, laundering, masking debts with investments that never paid off. And Dad? Dad had known. Helped him, maybe, or at the very least kept it all hidden under lock and ledger. That voicemail? It wasn't a sudden betrayal. It was a silencing, a preemptive burial of truth. Memories started flooding back, moments I hadn't thought about in years. Times Grace's name came up and was brushed aside. "She's better off away from the family," Dad once muttered when I asked. Now I wondered. Was she pushed away, or did she run before they could do to her what they did to me? I copied pages, not all, just enough to trace the thread. I slid Grace's letter into my jacket pocket, zipped it up, and stood in the doorway one last time. The study was no longer a place of nostalgia. It was a crime scene. As I stepped outside, the wind picked up. Leaves scattered across the lawn, spinning like tiny messengers, ushering me forward. I wasn't angry, not yet. That would come later. For now, there was only clarity. I'd been shut out because I'd looked too long at the truth. And now that I had it, I wasn't just fighting to get back in. I was going to burn down everything they'd built on lies. It was a Wednesday, gray, wind-whipped, and bitter like the coffee I let go cold on my dashboard. I parked in front of the family business building just after 10. I wasn't there to argue or beg. I wasn't even there to see anyone. I just had a cardboard box in the passenger seat, filled with the last of my things. Photos, a ceramic mug I got from a hardware convention, a framed quote Dad gave me on my first day. "Do right, even when it costs you." I almost laughed, thinking of that now. Walking into that building was like stepping into a different climate. Conversation stopped. Phones lowered. People I used to eat lunch with suddenly looked like strangers trying not to make eye contact. I nodded once, steady and slow, then headed to my old office. Well, Dorian's office now. The hallway felt longer than usual. Or maybe I was walking slower. Halfway down, Dorian turned the corner. We locked eyes. He was wearing one of his tailored suits, the kind that says, "I win, and you can't afford to play." He smirked. "You're not supposed to be here." I kept my grip firm on the box. "Just returning what's mine." He leaned slightly, lowering his voice. "It's done, Calen. You walking in here doesn't reverse it." I paused, then stepped past him without another word. Left the box by the receptionist's desk. As I turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of the office I used to sit in. Someone else's coat now hung behind the door. By evening, I was back in my apartment. The silence felt louder than usual. I sat at my kitchen table, lit only by the glow of the microwave clock. My phone buzzed once, an alert about a sports score I didn't care about. I opened my notes app, typed slowly, carefully. I copied the words into the family group chat. I know why this happened. You chose lies over blood. Let this be your warning. The truth doesn't stay buried forever. Then, without waiting for the read receipts, I removed myself from the chat. Blocked Dorian. Blocked Mom. Blocked 3 cousins. Left only Aunt Grace and a number I knew didn't work anymore. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. But I knew they'd call it a threat anyway. Sure enough, within an hour, my cousin Hannah forwarded me a screenshot. The group was buzzing. Words like unhinged and paranoid thrown around like confetti. One message stood out. Dorian's. Careful, I've got lawyers, and you've got nothing but stories. I saved that text to a secure folder, labeled it Exhibit A. Thanks for the exhibit, big bro. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not from fear. Just fatigue. From the gaslighting, the erasure, from years of being painted as the one who misunderstood everything. I stared at the ceiling, remembering being 12, trying to explain to my parents that Dorian had stolen from my birthday card. He denied it, smiled sweetly, and I got sent to my room for lying. Same pattern, different stakes. I sat up, walked to my desk, opened my laptop, dragged in the scanned pages from the ledgers, Grace's letter, the screenshot of Dorian's threat, created a new folder, The Real Family Business. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was preservation, a record, a map for anyone who'd ever been told they were imagining the rot they saw up close. The elevator opened with a soft chime. I stepped out into a hallway lined with fresh drywall, clean glass, and that unmistakable new construction smell. Paint, carpet glue, and something sterile underneath it all. The leasing agent walked a few steps ahead, tapping away on her tablet. This wing's been available since last fall, she said. We've had a few inquiries, but nothing solid. Still staged from a previous negotiation. I didn't answer. My eyes were on the floor tiles, the subtle two-tone design I'd suggested 3 years ago, the custom lighting fixtures, my pick from a sustainability vendor. Even the frosted glass wall facing the city skyline bore the etched contour I'd sketched on a napkin during a meeting that now felt like a past life. She opened the double doors into the suite. The air inside was still. Furniture untouched. A faint hum from the HVAC broke the silence. No name on the lease yet, she added, glancing at me. The deal fell apart after some leadership change. Internal restructure, I believe. I nodded once. Right. They built this space for me. I knew it then, and I knew it now. This floor was supposed to be the start of my own division. New territory, new title, new freedom. But somewhere between then and now, my name was erased before the ink ever dried. They didn't just fire me, I thought, running a hand along the edge of the conference table. They erased the future I built before I ever got to live it. I thanked the agent and left without leaving my name. There was no need. The silence of that empty office said more than I ever could. That evening, after a drive that felt like exile on wheels, I dropped my keys into the bowl by my door, tossed my blazer onto the couch, and poured myself a glass of whatever was left in the fridge. I hadn't even taken the first sip when my phone buzzed. No caller ID. I almost ignored it. But something in my gut told me to answer. The voice on the other end was low, raspy, like someone who'd smoked through every truth they ever told. You don't know me, the voice said, but I worked for your father, long time ago. I sat up straight. Okay, Watch your brother. He's not just careless, he's dangerous. Click. No name, no way to call back. Just that voice lingering in the air like smoke after a fire. I recorded the message and dropped the file into the folder I'd labeled Insurance. I didn't panic. I didn't even flinch. The anger had cooled to something else. Something sharper. Controlled. Focused. Later that night, I pulled out the original blueprints for the downtown complex. I printed them out, circled the suite I had walked through hours earlier, and wrote one word on top in red ink. Reclaimed. Then I opened a browser window, formed an LLC under a placeholder name, started researching funding streams. Quietly, methodically. I wasn't just going to expose what they'd done. I was going to build the version of this legacy they never saw coming. They thought they'd broken me. They forgot I'd built the floor they stand on. I got the email at 2 p.m. sharp on Tuesday. No greeting, no context, just internal review, urgent, and a downtown address. I recognized the building. Neutral-looking legal office, halfway between my apartment and the old store. I paused before replying, then hit accept. I was ready. The conference room was quiet when I entered. Beige walls, a heavy wood table, ice-cold air from vents overhead. I slid into the chair opposite Dorian. Beside him sat Dad, Malcolm, and a woman I didn't know. Sharp suit, sharper gaze. 2 men in dark suits lingered near the door. And the webcam in the center of the table? Unplugged. Dad spoke first, voice low. "This is off the record." Dorian leaned forward. "Just a formality for reconciliation." The lawyer, Ms. Celeste Granger, slid a stack of papers across the table. "This NDA is standard." Her tone was smooth, too smooth. I flipped to the last page and froze. An obscure annex in tiny type. Hidden clause. Past property share agreement could be revoked. Revoked, not just altered, if certain conditions weren't met. Conditions I never even saw. I looked at Dorian. "So you plan to erase my co-founder rights," I said quietly. "Through a clause hidden in documents I never agreed to." Dorian's jaw clenched. Dad swallowed. Ms. Granger gave me a warning glance, but I kept going. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out 3 files. 1. Emails from my inbox, showing my knowledge of property allocations and receiving pre-approvals. 2. Early drafts of those very agreements, with my digital initials. 3. Calendar invites, town hall meetings, a branding session where I presented our expansion plan. Essentially, I was part of writing that clause. I slid the documents forward. "Here's proof you couldn't erase my name before. I helped write it." Silence. It stretched. I didn't flinch. Dad's eyes, frank eyes, wavered. He opened his mouth, closed it. Dorian shifted in his seat. No words came. Ms. Granger broke the quiet. "The session isn't doing what we planned." She cleared her throat. "I think we should stop here." I gathered my documents, stood. My voice was calm. "I won't sign anything. I'll never sign something that treats me as if I never existed." I placed the NDA face down. They all watched. I said, "You invited me thinking I'd beg, or at least plead ignorance, but I stopped asking years ago." I walked out. No dramatic slam, just a firm closing of the door. The click echoed. It wasn't just the end of the meeting. It was the start of something else. I paused in the hallway. I could feel the shift. The power isn't theirs anymore. It traveled with me as I stepped outside into that blustery afternoon, walking back through downtown. The traffic noise, the city bustle, everything felt charged, like I was no longer walking alone, but carrying a storm under my coat. That night, I didn't plan to leak anything. I didn't want to fuel a frenzy, but the documents slipped, leaked. Not by me, but by someone who cared more about justice than business. And once the first file went public, headlines followed. Sometimes power chooses its own path. When I got back to my apartment that evening, I didn't notice the envelope at first. It was just a manila folder, slid barely under the front door. No return address, no handwriting. Just quiet presence, like something waiting to be noticed. I carried it to the kitchen table, sliced it open with my house key, and let the contents slide out. Photocopies. Dozens of them. Falsified tax filings. Backdated email threads bearing Dorian's letterhead. Numbers that didn't add up on one sheet. Signatures I recognized, but not in the right places. And on top, a yellow post-it stuck halfway sideways. 4 words scrawled in black ink. You're not the only one he burned. I stared at the pile, my heartbeat dead even. No anger, just recognition. Dorian hadn't just been sloppy. He'd been arrogant enough to leave a trail. The next morning, I sat across from Greg Ransom, my friend and attorney. He scanned the pages, lips pressing into a thin line. "This stuff's not fake," he said finally. "It's old, but it's real, and it's damning." He pulled his glasses down slightly, eyes steady. "This could be wire fraud, tax fraud, contract manipulation. If it's part of any public filings, we're talking felony-level consequences." I nodded. "So it's not just business anymore?" Greg leaned back. "No. Now it's chess." I left his office and headed to meet Mr. Wallace that afternoon. He'd been close to my father since I was a kid, one of the old money types who believed in handshakes and bourbon more than paperwork. But lately, he hadn't returned my calls. Until now. We sat at a quiet booth in an old steakhouse downtown. He didn't even wait for the menu. "I saw the files," he said, eyes not meeting mine. I didn't flinch. "Then you know." He sighed, long and hard. "Calen, I've known your father 30 years. Watched him build that company like it was his second family. But what I saw? That's not just missteps. That's poison." I stayed quiet. He went on, voice low. "I'm pulling out of the merger, publicly, and I'm backing your firm instead." It took me a moment to speak. "That'll cause noise." Wallace smiled faintly. "That's the idea. Time some noise got made." By evening, I was back in my apartment, drinking black coffee over the kitchen counter when the retaliation began. Phone buzzed, multiple times. A news alert. Calen Carter faces psychological breakdown, family concerned about erratic behavior. The source? A blog tied to one of our old PR agencies, one Dorian had used in the past. I barely blinked. It was textbook. Discredit before exposure. Shame before truth. An hour later, more blogs followed. Whispers of instability. Estranged son lashes out. I let them pile up. I didn't go to war on social media. I didn't call a press conference. Instead, I drafted one short memo. No names, no accusations, just a quiet nudge to those in the know. Let's not pretend the empire wasn't built on paper cuts and silence. I sent it to 10 people, old friends, 2 retired reporters, 3 industry analysts, 1 former board member, and 1 man who used to clean the corporate office and always knew more than he let on. That night, I slept with the lights off, and my windows open, wind rustling through the curtains. Calm, collected, ready. Because in families like mine, truth isn't just buried, it's air-sealed. But every vault leaks when the hinges rot from the inside. Uncle Randall called it a family peace session, but everyone knew it was a final performance. A last-ditch effort to shove the dirt back under the rug before the whole damn house collapsed. He chose a countryside estate out in Bardstown. Fancy, quiet, private, neutral ground, or so, they claimed. But the minute I stepped through the carved oak doors and saw who'd shown up, Dorian, Malcolm, Aunt Lorraine, and 2 of my cousins, I knew this was no truce. This was theater. Before anything started, a security guy in a navy polo collected our phones. "House rules," he said. "No devices?" I smiled politely and handed mine over. What he didn't notice was the pen clipped inside my blazer. Slim, matte black, and very much recording. We gathered around a heavy table in the main dining hall, pretending this was some kind of brunch. Lorraine poured sweet tea like it mattered. Dorian leaned back like he wasn't sweating under his collar. Malcolm nodded as if he hadn't paid silence in blood. "Let's speak calmly," Uncle Randall said, folding his hands like a pastor. "No lawyers, no press. Just family." I waited a beat. Then leaned forward, looked Dorian dead in the eye. "So, about the falsified tax filings and the forged backdates, and the part where you sold our legacy for a fraction of its worth." "Watch your tone," Malcolm snapped. I didn't blink. "We don't air family business in front of strangers, right?" I turned slightly toward him. "Then maybe you shouldn't have handed it to them." Dorian scoffed. "You're chasing ghosts, Calen." Aunt Lorraine placed her glass down, hard enough to make it rattle. "No, he's not," she said. "Because I got one of those doctored contracts, too. Mine had a page missing, until someone sent me the real version." The room shifted. Tension wasn't just thick, it cracked. Dorian looked at her like she'd switched teams mid-game. He pointed a trembling hand at me. "You're a virus, Calen. You infect trust. You ruin everything you touch." I didn't raise my voice, just reached into my inner pocket, pulled out the pen, and clicked it once. The room went still. From the tiny speaker, Dorian's voice came out, sharp, smug, unmistakable. He was always too soft to lead. I just helped speed up nature. Malcolm went pale. Lorraine's jaw clenched. One cousin whispered, "Holy hell." Ms. Cleanup, the house manager, walked in to refill our water and caught the tail end. She paused, sensing something thick in the air, then quietly stepped out. I stood, pocketed the pen again. "That's all I needed," I said. "Y'all can go back to pretending." I left before they could organize damage control. The ride home was quiet, just the hum of the engine and the memory of that room spinning in silence. Later that night, around 9:30, I was folding laundry when my phone buzzed. News alert. Then another. Then 5 more. Breaking. Local news in Lexington confirms investigation into Carter Enterprises. Audio clip suggests internal sabotage. Sources remain anonymous. They didn't name me, not once. But that clip? That voice? Everyone in that room knew, and for the first time in months, I smiled. Because sometimes, the truth doesn't need a name. The lake barely rippled that morning, a stillness that felt foreign. I'd been staying at a cabin tucked into the woods outside Louisville, 2 weeks deep into my self-imposed exile. The world outside was boiling, but here, the silence was sharp enough to cut. Since the audio leak, every major news outlet had latched onto the Carter name like a pit bull to a bone. Headlines swung between corporate betrayal and personal tragedy. Commentators debated the legacy, the downfall, and who would get swallowed first. I watched none of it live, just read transcripts forwarded from Greg and muted video clips when I had to. I'd come to this place to breathe. But the firestorm kept finding me. It was early evening when I checked the email on the old burner phone I'd used during the lawsuit years. A single message sat in the inbox. No subject, no signature. Attached were PDFs, financial records, wire transfer details, scanned documents with overseas bank logos and trust accounts under shell LLCs. At first I thought it was spam. But then I saw the names. Malcolm Carter. Dates that lined up too perfectly. Some of it went back a decade. One file caught my breath. A quarterly fund movement into an account based out of the Cayman Islands. 500,000. Then again, 3 months later, another million. Beneath it was one line. He didn't just protect the family business, he protected himself first. The sender had used an internal Carter server IP. Someone inside wanted the world to know. I forwarded it to Greg. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. He didn't bother with greetings, just a flat, This changes everything. By the next morning, Malcolm's name was trending for the wrong reasons. IRS whistleblowers confirmed an ongoing audit. Anonymous sources cited irregularities tied to board payouts and offshore structures. Some called it strategic wealth preservation. Others called it fraud. Dorian and Malcolm were now pointing fingers. Leaked voicemails showed them turning on each other. No more united front. Just self-preservation dressed in Armani suits. That night, while heating soup on the stovetop, I got a knock at the cabin door. She introduced herself softly. Marla Haynes, Courier Journal. I know you've been avoiding cameras. I'm not here to shove one in your face. She held up a small recorder. Just off record. A conversation. Someone inside your family tipped me off about the offshores. But your voice is what this story needs. I studied her face. No hunger for scandal, no rush for headlines. Just that tired kind of truth-seeking I hadn't seen since my mother's funeral. So I talked. Not everything, but enough. She asked if I hated them. No, I said, but I stopped trusting that the blood in your veins means loyalty in your heart. 3 days later, a segment aired titled The Forgotten Son. It wasn't sensational. It didn't need to be. It was quiet, precise. The clips played of a younger me at ribbon cuttings, photos with Mom in front of the first Carter campus, company newsletters quoting my early leadership. Then came the contrast, boardroom removals, falsified documents, the infamous audio. And then, silence. A wide shot of the lake, the cabin barely visible behind trees. My inbox flooded overnight. Notes from former colleagues. Friends of my mother I hadn't heard from in years. Even a few names I recognized from company holiday parties. People who never said a word back then. One message stood out. We always knew you were the only honest one. Took guts to stay that way. I stared at it for a while. That afternoon, the mail carrier left a certified envelope at the cabin gate. A letter from the Carter board. And as I opened it, one thought hit harder than anything else. The war wasn't over. But I'd just won my first real battle. Monday came with a wind that whipped the flag outside Carter Enterprises into a tangled snarl, fitting for what waited inside. I stepped into the marble atrium, barely noticing the receptionist's nod. I had one hand in my coat pocket, holding the letter from the board. The other hand carried a leather folder, time-stamped, notarized, and heavy with the weight of a name I never asked to carry. The boardroom was packed before 9. Dorian was already seated at the head of the table, flanked by 2 lawyers who looked like they'd skipped sleep and skipped ethics. Across from him, Malcolm sat stiff, eyes shadowed. I could see the sweat rising at his temples. He didn't speak, not even a greeting. Just stared at the mahogany table like it might crack open. Dorian launched in immediately. Emergency vote. I'm proposing we transfer controlling shares into a blind trust. Remove all disputed heirs from the chain until this scandal clears. He didn't say my name, but he didn't have to. Then I pulled out the folder. Before we vote, I said, I think the board should see this. The room hushed as I placed the document on the center of the table. An older will, dated and signed. Malcolm's signature, unmistakable, witnessed, sealed. It named me, not just as a beneficiary, but as successor to Malcolm's voting shares in the event of executive incapacitation or legal conflict. One of the board members, Mrs. Keene, lifted the first page, then flipped to the second. "Where did this come from?" Dorian's voice cracked, not with confusion, but with something closer to panic. Malcolm didn't move. "Your father drafted it right after your mother passed," I said. "He thought I wouldn't survive the grief long enough to use it. Joke's on him. I did." A soft gasp traveled the room. Outside the window, I caught sight of Marla Haynes, standing with a small camera crew beside a group of ex-employees holding cardboard signs. One read, "Carter's silence is not golden." And then chaos bloomed. A junior accountant burst through the door, escorted by security. He held up a printout. "There's more," he said, eyes darting between the board. "Anonymous leak to the IRS this morning. Campaign donations, family fund misuse, 7 years' worth." Subpoenas hit the table like dominoes. The boardroom turned courtroom in seconds. Dorian stood up. "None of this is admissible without..." "Without what?" I cut him off. "A father willing to lie again? A brother with enough charm to cover rot?" I looked around the room, letting the silence settle. "I'm not here to take back this company," I said. "I came to stop the story from repeating." I placed my hands on the edge of the table. "This isn't a business anymore. It's a mausoleum with a bank account. Let it burn. I'm not here to rebuild the old house. I'm building my own." Then I turned and walked out. The air outside was colder than I remembered, but it woke something in me. By afternoon, I was back downtown, 2 flights up in a modest office above a coffee shop. The paint was chipped, the light buzzed, and the files were stacked messily. But it was mine. Across from me sat a black woman in her 60s, struggling to secure a business license after being denied 3 times. "No retainer," I told her. "We'll start with what they gave you, and we'll make 'em explain why it wasn't enough." She looked at me like she didn't believe it. "My father built an empire by silencing people," I said. "I'll build mine by listening." We shook hands. That night, I sat alone under a desk lamp, sipping tea from a chipped mug I found in a thrift store. It said, "Best son ever." Ironic, maybe. Or prophetic. Then, just when I thought the war was over, a letter slipped under my door. Again. It was the kind of cold that crept into your bones without asking. I had just come back from the courthouse, another long day helping people who couldn't afford someone to listen, when I saw it, tucked between a utility bill and a pizza coupon. A weathered envelope, creased and faded, addressed in a handwriting I hadn't seen in over 2 decades. My mother's. No return address, just a Montana postmark dated 3 weeks ago. I stood there in the hallway of my apartment building, keys dangling from my fingers, heart hammering. I didn't even make it to the kitchen. I dropped everything else onto the couch, sat down with the letter like it might vanish if I looked away. I opened it with a kind of reverence I hadn't felt since she died. Inside, 1 page, yellowed slightly, the ink faded but unmistakably hers. "My dearest Calen, if you're reading this, I either found peace or ran out of places to hide." I paused. My hands started to shake. She told me the truth, or as much of it as she could. It wasn't just business that divided Malcolm and Dorian. It started with a betrayal. My grandfather's estate, my grandmother's will, rewritten behind closed doors after her sudden death. Dorian had convinced Malcolm to funnel assets through shell corporations, hiding funds that were never meant to be touched. When my mother found out, she tried to stop them. She failed. "I forged your father's second will. I was afraid of what they'd do to you if they knew you were meant to inherit anything. I don't regret protecting you. I regret not protecting myself better." Her words were careful, raw. "I left because I believed disappearing would keep you safe. But hiding doesn't erase guilt. I hope you forgive me one day. Not for what I did, but for what I couldn't do. I don't know how long I sat there. I read it 3, maybe 4 times. Each line carved a new hole in my chest. The next morning I packed a bag, gassed up the truck, and pointed it west. The road to Montana stretched long and quiet, giving me too much time to think. I wasn't chasing ghosts. I just wanted a piece of her that hadn't been filtered through memory or scandal. The town was small. No traffic lights, no chain restaurants, just a gas station, a diner, and the kind of silence that used to terrify me as a kid. I asked around until a woman at the post office pointed me toward a white farmhouse on the edge of a dried cornfield. A man in his 70s answered the door. He looked me over like he'd been expecting me his whole life. "You're Calen," he said. Not a question. "She said you might come one day," he added, and handed me a small brass key. She left this with me in 2006, said it was for someone she loved but never stopped fearing she'd failed. It was getting dark when I found the storage unit. The lock creaked open like something out of a movie. Inside, dust, still air, and boxes labeled in her handwriting. The first thing I saw was a camcorder, the kind people stopped using after 2002. Below it, VHS tapes, dozens of them, labeled by year, a box of letters, a journal with pressed flowers tucked between the pages. One box was just photographs. Me as a boy, my mother at the piano, Malcolm holding me on his shoulders like we were a real family. But the journal, that's what made my breath hitch. They think silencing me keeps the story theirs. But paper remembers what people forget. Her words, her voice, her version of everything. I sat down on the floor, cross-legged like I used to when she'd read to me, and turned to the first page of the journal. I hadn't cried in years, but I did then. Not out of grief, but from the weight of finally knowing I wasn't crazy, that I hadn't imagined the good in her, or the fear that had always lingered in her eyes. Outside, the wind picked up, whistling through the rusted frame of the unit. I held the first VHS tape in my hand. I didn't know if I was ready to see my family through her eyes. But I turned on the camcorder anyway. The courthouse had that dry, filtered air that made it hard to breathe, like it was trying to scrub the truth out of anyone walking through its doors. I stood in the marble lobby, flash drive in one pocket, a padded envelope in the other. I looked around at the people who'd tried to erase me. Now they sat in pews like churchgoers, dressed in their finest for the fall of their own gospel. Dorian looked polished, smug even. His tie was perfect, his entourage legal and loud. Beside him, Malcolm had the hollow look of a man who could already hear the cracking beneath his feet. The courtroom was packed. Media lined the back wall, their lenses aimed like rifles. Extended family filled the benches, leaning in to see if the forgotten son had any fire left in him. When the judge called my name, I stood. I didn't speak right away. I pulled the flash drive from my pocket and walked to the tech table. "Permission to play an audio recording," I said. The judge raised a brow. "Granted." The room hushed as my mother's voice filled the chamber. "This is for my son, Calen. If you're hearing this, it means I didn't get the chance to say it in person." She spoke of the night she disappeared. The threats. How Dorian cornered her in the conservatory. Voice low but clear. "You're not going to cost us everything for that boy." She confessed to forging signatures, hiding the real will on a digital vault she created as a safeguard. "I knew they'd come for you, Calen. I just hoped you'd come back for yourself." Gasps rippled. Dorian stood, started to object, but the judge cut him off. I handed the envelope to the clerk. Inside, the authenticated digital will. It was time-stamped, notarized virtually, and stored in 3 different encrypted servers. "Calen Carter," the judge read, scanning it. "Named primary beneficiary and executor, with stipulations for charitable disbursement and employee pensions." Dorian tried again. That document is a forgery. My lawyer stood. Then perhaps you'd like to explain these, he said, placing 3 folders on the judge's bench. They were copies of offshore accounts. Money laundered through shell firms tied to Carter Enterprises, all traced back to Dorian's personal signature and Malcolm's blind approvals. Submitted through federal whistleblower protections last week, my lawyer added, accompanied by testimony from the firm's former CFO. The judge didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her gavel landed with a thud that seemed to echo straight through Dorian's spine. I'm ruling in favor of Mr. Carter. The court recognizes the digital will as legally binding. Assets are to be transferred per the instructions within. The room broke like glass. Cameras flashed. Reporters whispered in waves. Dorian sat down like someone pulled the rug out from under his entire life. Malcolm stared straight ahead, not saying a word. As I stepped away from the bench, 2 plainclothes officers quietly approached Dorian. They didn't cuff him. Not yet. But the message was loud. I walked past the rows of family members. Some I hadn't spoken to in years. A few looked away. 1 or 2 nodded. Outside, the sky was low and gray. Fall leaves stuck to the pavement in swirls of gold and rust. I passed the display wall by the courthouse entrance, where portraits of the Carter patriarchs lined the hall. I stopped briefly at the one of my father, his jaw clenched, his eyes hard, painted to look like a titan. I'm not here to carry your name, I whispered. I'm here to clean up what you tried to bury under it. Back at the truck, I pulled the storage box from the passenger seat and slid the flash drive inside. Then I started driving. Not toward the office, not back to Louisville, but west. Montana was still waiting. I didn't win because I fought harder. I won because I finally stopped fighting for their version of me. They say justice is a finish line, but I've learned it's really just a mirror. What you see in it depends on how long you've been running and who you became along the way. If you've ever felt like the black sheep in your family, if you've been told you're not enough, or that keeping quiet keeps the peace, I want you to remember this. Silence doesn't make you noble. It just makes room for more injustice. It took me years to stop fighting for a version of myself they could accept. The moment I began fighting for the truth, not revenge, everything changed. My mother taught me that love sometimes means disappearing to protect someone. But healing means showing up for yourself, even when no one else does. So let me ask you, what version of yourself are you fighting for right now? Is it one you chose or one you inherited? If this story touched your heart, leave a comment with a 1 or tell me where you're watching from. I'd love to know. And if you didn't connect with it, let me know why. I'm listening. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to hear more stories that go deeper than headlines. Stories about family, truth, and finding your own voice. See you in the next one.